Okay, great. So hi everyone. My name is Isabel from the LEAP team. If you haven't met me before, I'm taking over for Assad hosting today's call. He's still here. But I'll just do a little bit of introduction. So today's webinar is on web and product development for pet care startups, and we're so lucky to have, sorry, 1 second. To have Greer Wilk from Dogdrop here today. He is the co-founder and COO of Dogdrop, which is a startup based in Los Angeles doing a new type of dog daycare. They are located in Arts District. I went to their location a couple weeks ago, and it's so cool. And I highly recommend checking it out if you are in the LA area or visiting. And these are some cool photos, a little bit of the space, and I'm sure she'll be sharing more later in the call. And just a few details before we get started. It's about a 30-minute presentation with about 15 to 30 minutes of Q&A. You can ask questions anytime in the chat window, and we ask you to stay muted the entire time until we get into asking questions. And just a reminder that this is being recorded, so it'll be up on our YouTube channel after this, and we can share it with anyone that's not able to join. And just a little bit about Leap Ventures. So Leap Ventures was founded a couple years ago with an awareness that there's underinvestment in the pet care industry, but so many startups that are coming about to solve new problems for pet parents. And this is one of the first programs designed to ignite meaningful growth across the entire pet care ecosystem. LEAP is a partnership between Michelson Found Animals, which is a nonprofit based in Los Angeles, and Kinship, a division of Mars Pet Care. And these are our two programs. So the LEAP Venture Academy is what is hosting this webinar today. This is a program for all pet care startups, completely free, to supply support for anyone interested in starting a pet care startup. So we have webinars like this one, 1 to 2 times a month, pitch competitions at major conferences, meetups, so that different founders can meet each other in person. We hosted our first boot camp in the fall for female founders, and we'll be hosting some boot camps this year as well. And in addition, through our Slack channel and connections and calls with me and Assad, you can get access to mentors, advisors, and funding. And then our Leap Venture Studio is our other program, and we have 1 cohort per year. For 6 to 8 startups, it's 3 months of programming in Los Angeles and New York City, and up to $200,000 in funding. And the applications open in the fall, so definitely check out some of our informational webinars this summer about the studio. And if you have any questions, comments, or feedback, definitely email us, leapventurestudio@gmail.com. Follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, and join our Slack channel. And if anyone needs access to that Slack channel, I'll put it in the chat box. And with that introduction, I'm going to pass it over to Greer.
Hi, everybody. Sorry for the delay. My Zoom link isn't working for some reason, so I won't be able to see your questions pop up, but hopefully we can answer them afterwards. So I will just start with just that first slide there and give you a little intro. So again, I'm Greer. Thanks for the intro, Isabel. I'm the co-founder and COO of Dogdrop, and we're a new dog daycare concept, essentially trying to address the issues of, like high quality care, ultra flexibility, and just sort of being a better option for people and how they want to live with their dogs nowadays. And on this front slide are 2 of our cute little members. They're 2 little Schnauzer brothers, Ace and
Sorry,
Kai.
really quickly, Isabel, can you refresh the screen? Sorry, we don't see the slide.
Oh, sorry. 1 second.
Sorry about that, Greer.
That's okay. Let me know when it's working.
Sorry, 1 second. Can you see it now?
Yes. Can you just go to the next slide just to make sure that it goes?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yep. Okay, cool. Thank you. Sorry.
No worries. Okay, so we can just go to the next slide. That's fine. So let's just start off with the sort of basics of, what is web and product development. So the three images on the slide are the sort of three broad categories of anything that you would be building or having development for. So on the left, you see the farmer's dog. That's their website. And so the first thing that you would possibly be building would just be a website. And a website is, just your basic web presence. It can be a landing page. It can be 10 pages large. It usually has some pretty basic functionality, a couple of CTA buttons, some content. Sometimes you can shop on the website. Usually there's like an about us, but basically it's just a sort of simple appearance of your company on the website, and it's relatively easy to build. The second thing that you'd be building would be a web application. And so that's an application that is a bit more complex. Usually there's a walled sign-in. So it's an application that can't really be accessed on a tablet or a phone. You can access it on a browser. So it doesn't function as well as a native app does, but it's something that has a bit more functionality. Usually it's like, this is an example of one. Ginger is a web application. So on the phone, you can see in the picture, somebody's just opened up a browser and they're using Ginger on the browser. And that usually has, more in-depth functionality than a website, but less functionality than a native app. And so the third category of development would be a native app. And that's something, whether it's Android or iOS. So it's Apple functional or it's Android functional. And that's what you see on the right. That's the Poprin app. And so, that has specific functions that work with a phone or a tablet, push notifications, all of those kind of things that you can really only do on a mobile device. And so those are the three things that one would build with code. And so those are the sort of basic categories of web development. So the next slide, please, Ismail. So you have to sort of ask yourself what you need, right? Because, it's a given that you need a website. But in terms of having all three of those things, like, I also need a web app and I also need a native app, those are things that you really have to evaluate. You have to ask yourself, what is relevant to my business? Because in a lot of cases, a native app, what purpose is it going to serve for your business? And it's the most expensive thing to build, right? So if you don't really need it, you probably shouldn't have it. Don't sort of feel pressured by the fact that everybody has an app and you think you're sort of going to follow the trend and also have an app that maybe doesn't really provide value to your users or your customers. Most of the time, you can, have everything you need on a website, particularly if you're an e-commerce company or you're selling a particular product. If you have a service, that's generally when you get into the mode of possibly needing a web app or a native app. And then again, you have to decide kind of between the two of them, what really serves your purpose and what serves your customers. And then the next thing you have to sort of ask yourself is, okay, well, if I do decide that I need something that's, really in-depth, I need a more in-depth website, or I need a more in-depth web app or native app, can I use a platform that is out there? Or do I have to outsource and find someone else who can build it for me? And we'll get into that in a little more detail. And this picture is just an example of someone who more than likely did it themselves, and they didn't do it so successfully. It's a little bit overwhelming, and they probably could have used a little bit of help. So next slide. So what is the process for building a web app or a website or any of those things look like? Well, so there's four kind of big categories that you have to consider. There's the methodology, which I'll talk a little bit more about each of these, but there's the methodology. So how do you want to actually code it? There's the design aspect. So what do you want it to look and feel like? What do you want the experience to be? There's the question of what resources are out there. So like I said, do you want to build it yourself? Or do you want to have some sort of development team, whether that is an external team or an internal team? Next slide. And so when we look at methodology, I'm sure you guys have heard a lot of different words or terms bandied about, but there's three kind of things that are really important to keep in mind. And most of the time when you're talking to someone who will help you build something, they're going to use these terms. So it's just really good to know. So waterfall is the sort of initial coding methodology. It was one of the first. It was sort of the more traditional method. And they don't really use it anymore. It's really like, because it doesn't allow for a lot of flexibility. So when you're building something in waterfall, you have to build one thing, and then once that's done, you build the next thing, and then once that's done, you build the next thing. And so every piece is dependent upon the previous one, and it makes it really hard to be flexible if you make a mistake, or let's just say you went and built some huge thing, you wouldn't really be able to easily go back and make adjustments. And so that's why they developed the Agile methodology. And so under the umbrella of Agile, you have Scrum, FDD, which is feature-driven development. So that's based around one feature. And then you have extreme programming. And so those are just different types of Agile that focus on one feature. But the way Agile works is you have a development team, you have a product manager. The product manager says, okay, what feature are we trying to build, or what features are we trying to build? And so you might say, oh, I really need a CRM, and I need a way for people to log in really well, and I need people to make purchases of my product. And so the product manager will say, okay, well, each of those individual things is a certain amount of work for our developers, and they would assign a sort of total workload, like, okay, that will take 20 man hours or woman hours, and they'll sort of divide up the work in what are called sprints. And so you might say, okay, the next 2 weeks we're going to be working on the sign-in feature, and then the 2 weeks after that we're going to work on the purchase funnel. And so the product manager divides those up so that the developers can build them. And it allows for a lot more flexibility, because you can always go back at any time in the next set of sprints. You can adjust what you did before, or make changes or build something new. And so that's really what people use nowadays. And when you're speaking to a product manager, it's really good to have an understanding of that, so that you can explain to them, like, okay, well, these are all the features that we need, and I think it would take about this long. And lean is something that you probably have heard, like the term lean startup. And this is just really good to keep in mind, because the idea of lean is that you don't have any waste, and that you're doing as little as possible to achieve the goal that you're trying to achieve. So it's like, instead of building the whole app all at once, what can we do right now and launch with that's as basic as possible, that serves the basic initial function that we need, and then we can sort of like add and iterate from there. And that's just what, so when you're doing Agile, you typically want to keep that idea of lean in mind, because you don't want to go build something and then realize, like, oh shoot, we didn't need 10 of these features, and then now you spent a bunch of money and you didn't really need to in the first place. Okay, next slide. So the next concept or thing that we need to talk about or think about is design. And there's a couple different categories of design. So there's customer experience, and user research kind of falls into the customer experience category. And customer experience is really, if you think about everything that you're offering, whether it's a service or a product or whatever it happens to be, the customer experience is everything that your user or your customer would experience end to end. So in our case, for Dogdrop, right, we have people walking into our location, and we want to know, okay, do they spend a lot of time in the entryway? How do they prefer to drop their dog off? Do they like to hand us the leash, and then we walk the dog in, and then we take the leash off, and then we check them in? Or, what does that whole process look like? For someone who's selling something on an e-commerce website, it might be, where do people find us online? How many clicks does it take for someone to find my product, whether it's on Amazon or your own website? Anything like that that's related to how someone interacts with your business or your product digitally, that's what the customer experience is. And when you build a product, you want it to enhance that experience and make that experience as simple and easy as possible. So for us at Dogdrop, we're in the process of building an app that is going to help people check in more easily and manage their account. So they know, okay, I've been to Dogdrop 5 times this month. I have 5 more days left on my subscription. So things like that really enhance what you're doing rather than sort of get in the way or make it more complicated. And then user research is really something that is important to do throughout the process of building your app or your product, because ultimately you're always going to be building your app or product. It needs to be something that's maintained. Of course, a website has less maintenance because you sort of just put it up there and then maybe every couple of years you can update it. But realistically, it's something that you want to, anything that you put out there, so the first version of your app or the initial version of your website, you really want to push that out there to as many people as you can and say, hey, can you give us some feedback? Because we really want to know, like, is it confusing? How many times do you feel like you have to click in order to get through and purchase whatever product it is that we're selling? So all of those things you want to ask people. And then there are also websites like user testing where you can actually watch people click through your website and see what they're doing, rather than just having to ask them on their opinion, which sometimes can be a lot more valuable. And then UX is actually related directly to whatever you're building. So down here on the bottom, this idea of the picture of wireframes and wire flow. So user experience is the actual experience of using your digital product. So, you have a login, and then where does that button on the login page go? Does it go to, a password failure screen? Or if someone puts in their information correctly, like, does it then go to the home page? And then when they're on the home page and they click a different button, where does that go? And so it's really like the mapping of what your product will look like in the end. And there's no visual design really that's added. It's all basic and it's all very functional. And the idea is to be able to build, the shell of what you're doing. And then you add UI on top of that, which is user interface. And user interface is the visual experience that a customer has of your product. And so user interface is things like your colors, the fonts that you're using, where are you putting the words on the page? All of those things that that also have a huge impact along with the actual flow of your product or your website. And so for UI, the things to keep in mind are when you initially launch, you really want to have like 1 or 2 colors that you're using on your website most of the time. If you think about Target or any other strong brand, Target's website is basically red and white. And there's a lot more creativity you can have there, but that's just a basic. So you want to be consistent as much as you can. You don't want to have a round CTA button on one page and a square CTA button on another page. And so, the designers that you're using will have a visual language or a pattern library that they would be pulling from in order to basically create the way that your product looks. Okay, so the next slide is just a couple DIY resources. I'm sure most of you guys have probably seen them. I just put a couple that I really like. So Wix and WordPress are a bit more DIY in the sense that you have a lot more flexibility to code things. So if a template that they offer doesn't have the things that you need, then you can either find someone to code something for you or you can do it yourself. But there's a bit more flexibility to do that, as opposed to Squarespace and Shopify, where the templates are quite strong and they don't have a lot of options for you to code things and customize things yourself. And then there's a website called bubble.io, and that's one of the pictures I have on there. And that's actually what they call a no-code software builder. So it's not just for website building. You can actually build a web application that is sort of templatized, and you can drag and drop, and you don't have to necessarily pay a development team or an agency to do it. And there are a couple of other ones out there like that, but Bubble is one of the more well-known ones. Okay, so next slide. So If you do decide that you want to outsource, that you don't want to build it yourself, that you're not really interested, you don't have enough experience, or no one on your team is able to do that for you, then there are 3 options, varying in price and sort of control that you have at your disposal. So the first is to hire a technical co-founder or a CTO. So someone who is a programmer, does know how to build things, and has a stake in what you're doing, and is really interested in helping you build whatever product it is, particularly if you're building, let's say, a platform, right? If you need to build something that's very robust and it just has to be customized, then more than likely you'll want someone who's technical on your team that you hire, that may come at a lower salary, but is very invested in your company and is sort of able to help you build something. Another option is to hire a development team. And so that can be onshore, meaning in the United States or wherever you live, or offshore, meaning like in a different country. A lot of times they're in Eastern Europe or India, or sometimes in Australia. You can find teams kind of all over the world like this. With a development team, you have to do a lot of oversight, because basically what it is you give them a list of requirements and you sort of hand it to them and they go, okay, great, and then they build it. And so you really do still need someone on your team who's able to project or product manage the development team, but it can be a lot cheaper to do it this way if you already have someone in-house who has a little bit of product experience and can sort of guide them. And then the third option is an agency. And an agency is a sort of like soup to nuts. They'll do everything for you. Sometimes they'll even do your branding. And so they'll be able to build you, everything. They'll have all the designers in-house. They'll have developers. They'll have a product manager, and they'll be able to sort of help you and guide you a lot more, especially if you don't have a lot of experience. The only trade-off with that is they are typically quite expensive. You can find them to do it for you for less. But you have to really shop around, and it's good to really kind of vet them, because you don't want them to sort of get an initial concept for you, and because you don't have that much experience, to sort of run with it, and then in the end you end up with a product that's maybe totally great and looks really great, but isn't actually what you needed in the first place. Yeah, so then the next slide is just kind of to wrap everything up. So the next steps would be, there's 3 things, right? So there's the cost-benefit analysis. So you have to go back and you have to think, okay, we have a website right now. We're thinking about building a website or an app, and we have to decide what is the trade-off of building an app, which may cost us, X thousands of dollars, or $10,000 or whatever that is. Is that upfront investment going to be worth 5x or 10x customers? Is what we're building really going to enhance what we have to offer that much that we're going to be able to get that many more customers, and it's going to make it worth it to pay for it? Or is it the case that maybe you just need someone to kind of redo your website, help you with your SEO, and ultimately that's going to be the thing that you really need? And then if you do decide that, okay, I need a web app, or I need to rebuild my website, or I really need a native app, then you have to put together a basic set of requirements. So what are you going to hand over to the people that you're working with to give them a really good, clear idea of all the features that you think you'll need for whatever it is that you want to build? And they don't have to be perfect. They can change as you go through the process, but it's a really good idea to sort of have the basics, right? So we really need a way for people to manage their account, or we really need a super smooth checkout funnel. We really need people to be able to search for, different dog collars. So whatever that is, you want to have a list of those things so that the team that you're working with can get an idea of how much work they have to do and what it is that you're really trying to achieve. And then the last thing is, if you move forward with everything and you get to the point where you've built an initial version of whatever it is that you're building, do not be afraid to put it out there into the world, because everybody who builds something successful is putting themselves on the line. They put something out there, and you just have to test it. You have to see how people respond. You have to learn from your mistakes. You have to iterate, and then you have to keep going until, that thing is as great as it can be. And so I just put this quote from Reid Hoffman, which I like to refer to, which is that if you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product, you've launched it too late. And I think that goes for a hard product as well. As long as it's safe or whatever it is, you want to put out that initial version, you want to learn from it, and then you want to make it better, right? So that's very, very true for whatever digital product you're making. And the last thing I would say is just, I know this was specifically for pet care startups. I think these rules apply to any business that you're in. But for pet care startups, I think a lot of times we're selling maybe a niche product, or maybe it's something that everybody needs. And the question really I would ask yourselves is kind of think about your audience. So think about who the user is. If it's a dog collar, like what does that look like for the dog? Obviously we're not building digital products for the dogs or the cats or the whoever it is, but think about the pet parent and think about their mindset, and then have that kind of be the starting point for whatever it is that you decide to build. And then the last side is just more info. It's you can follow us on Instagram, check out our website, dogdrop.co, and I think that's it. So I don't know how we'll do the questions, Isabel. Maybe do you want to send them to me, or how do you want to do that?
Yeah, thank you first for the great presentation. I think if anyone has any questions, feel free to type them into the chat box, and I can say them out loud and have Greer answer them.
Okay, great.
Greer, I'll ask the first one, Assad, here, just out loud.
Here, Assad.
Hi, thank you. What's the one thing that you wish you had known, 6 months ago what's the one thing that you wish you'd known now?
Let's see. Well, so maybe I'll use this example. 6 months ago, we were we basically started construction on our space, and we were thinking to launch our app simultaneously. And I would say that I'm so glad that we waited, because in the past 6 months of talking to dog parents, and we've put on a bunch of events and we've done a bunch of things, and if we had built an app 6 months ago, it would be probably so irrelevant. We would have probably spent so much extra money that we didn't need to, that now that we're sort of in the process of preparing to have something be built, we know so much more, and it will be so much more of a useful tool for our members. And so I'm just really glad that, at the time we decided not to build something simultaneously, because it would have been a mistake.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Hey, I'm driving, so I'm just going to ask. This is Gordon Jones, pausein.org. So are you building your app so that you can interface with other applications like telehealth and whatever? Are you building a platform that you can interface with others?
That's not really as much of a purpose for us, that the app itself can interface. Although, we probably make sure that we have APIs just in case. But realistically, anything that we do that would kind of be utilizing other services would really be through kind of more of like a scheduling of those services, so that people could come to our location and utilize, like, for example, the second Tuesday of every month we have the groomer come and do like nail trimmings or something like that. And so our members would be able to schedule or get on the list for whatever additional services that we would use. And then we would reference, for example, the telehealth for pets, this brand is the one that we trust, like, and sort of push that out to our members, but not necessarily facilitate it through our own app, if that makes sense.
Gotcha.
I have a question. This is Jessica from Adoptimize. So I
Hi.
have I have a team of like really, really talented AI developers, but they're not the best with design. And so we're using a lot of like, we're using Ionic framework, but it's just meh. So I need to get somebody to design like intuitive user flows and just a really good kind of like brand experience. But I just don't think it would be a regular graphic designer. What kind of role would I be looking for?
So are you saying you'd want to like bring someone on and hire them?
No,
or
more
are you
like
saying
go on
outsource?
Upwork and find somebody to do a contract job.
Gotcha. Yeah, so most of the time you can find like a UX UI designer, and that would be someone, most designers, I mean, there are some people who just do graphic design, but really you'd be looking for a UX UI designer. So someone who can do both of those things. Most of them that I know have had experience doing both. And I think it depends on really how strong your visual branding situation is, whether you lean heavily to one or the other, if that makes sense.
Okay. Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
There is another question from Sylvia. If you could talk a little bit about the approval and marketing process for apps.
Oh, okay. So you mean like sort of once you have it complete, then how does that sort of process happen of getting it on the app store or whatever? So basically, most of the time, the developers that you use should know the requirements for whatever your app is. And if you're in process, you want to be making sure that you don't just build something without that in mind. So that's the first step is really being aware of like, okay, here's the criteria for Android or for iOS. And so that you're like, know you're ticking all the boxes when you're building. And then once you're complete, it's a pretty simple like submittal process. And then they basically just essentially approve or deny whatever it is, and both for Android and for iOS. I'm not intimately familiar with the submission process, but from my understanding, both of those, if you've been doing your due diligence throughout the app and you don't have anything that's like inappropriate, which I can't imagine for a pet care startup you would, most of the time you just get put on and it's no big deal. And then marketing wise, I think there's a couple ways to answer that question. Once your app is live, like before your app is launched, you want to make sure like through your user testing, you can do a bit of marketing. So before it gets accepted, you can be doing it that way and marketing a little bit that way, with friends and family, with your close and extended network. Trying to sort of, you can put up a landing page saying like our app is coming soon. That's one of the best ways to sort of build hype around your app before it gets accepted into iOS or Android stores. And so that's always something that you should be doing simultaneous to building a native app is like, let's put up a landing page, let's get people's attention, let's have a lead capture so that we have all of these people pre-signed up before we launch. And then once you do launch, there's a couple different ways of doing that. And I think it's having a really good website that sends people there. You can do digital ads. There's a whole mix of different things, and I think it really depends on your use case. But one of the biggest things I would emphasize is just kind of trying to do a little bit of push before you launch so that a bunch of people are aware of what you're doing.
Great, thank you. Another question is from a reptile manufacturing company and breeding company. Do you think an application would be useful? Why or why not?
That's an interesting use case. I think that in that situation, it really depends on how you already interact with your customer base. I don't know the industry very well, but just on surface level, taking a sort of stab, I would say that it could be quite useful if, for example, you were to have a bunch of people download the app and then it was sort of like a digital catalog, so that people could sort of shuffle through the options available to them. And then, essentially you're just allowing people to do that in a more mobile fashion. I suppose it really depends on, if you have testing right now of your website or how people currently access your service. you'll get a really good read on whether most of those people are using desktop or whether a lot of them are doing it from a mobile standpoint. So if everybody you know, or if 60 or 70 or 80% of the people who are accessing your website or your platform currently are doing that on their desktop at home, the question would be like, do people really need to shop for this or access it on the go? And if that's the case, you know, maybe it is, or if it's really more of like an ease of access first service. So, you know, somebody order something and then you want to be able to send them push notifications, or you want to be able to message them a bit easier. That would be uses, I think, that would argue in favor of a web app or a mobile app. But otherwise, I think if everything's done through customer service or on the phone, then I don't really know whether that would be super valuable.
Great, thank you. If anyone has any other questions, feel free to type them in the chat box or to unmute yourself and ask them to Greer directly.
Jessica's got another one. So what percentage of your budget are you spending on design versus development? Like, I'm kind of just looking for what can I expect to spend on design without asking you.
Yeah. So do you mean for say this person that you would hire off of the platform?
Just more like using contractors, or just like if your budget was $1 million, what percent would you expect to spend on design? Maybe $1 million.
Gotcha.
Bring it down. 100,000.
Yeah. So I think there's a couple things there. I think if you're just trying to hire a contractor who's like a UX UI designer, and you have not a too complicated thing that you're building, I think, you know, and let's just say it's like a 2-month contract or something like that. I don't know that I would say you could probably find someone who, if they were working part-time on that other project, maybe you could get someone to do that for $10,000. I don't, it's very variable depending on what it is that you're building.
Right.
Percentage-wise, it's kind of hard to do because it should all be very integrated. And so, you know, when developers code something, depending on how complex the design is, that makes their effort go up. And so I think if you have a really, really complex design and it's very, very design heavy, then, you know, it's going to be more kind of like 50-50. Whereas if you're sort of like a bit more simple and it's really just surface level, it's kind of basics, you're probably looking at more like 30% design spend and 70% development spend. But again, it's kind of hard to do that math unless you know exactly what it is, or unless I knew exactly what it is that you're building and I knew kind of how the team worked together, if that makes sense.
I understand. Thanks.
Yeah. Sure.
Any other questions? We'll give it a couple minutes and see if anyone else chimes in.
Greg, and I apologize if you already said this. I walked away from my computer for a second. How did you find your developer and designer as well? I mean, just from a high level, how did you find them?
Yeah, so we haven't, we're sort of right now in the process of deciding on a team. And so I have had many conversations with many different options over the past 6 months. You know, I've spoken to a one-man shop, someone who kind of does everything end to end. I've called Shopify. I've talked to them about all their options and people who, you know, specifically work on the Shopify platform. I've talked to full-blown agencies who do everything from, you know, the very beginning all the way through the end. And a lot of it was like word of mouth in the area, in the LA area. Fortunately, there are a lot of resources available. But a lot of it was like recommendations from people who have already built something. I think that's always the best place to start, is like, if you know somebody who has an app, or if you see something that you really like, you can always kind of reach out to them and say like, hey, who did your website development? There's also a couple just like general resources out there. Behance, which is Adobe's kind of like portfolio platform. And I think you can sign up for free. You just need your email. There's Behance and Dribbble is another platform, Dribbble with 3 B's. That's another platform where you can kind of shop around and find like designers, particularly, but web designers or web development agencies who have like put their stuff out there in portfolio, and you can, if you see something that you like or that you think you would need, you can go on there and find it. Same thing with like Upwork or Fiverr. You can kind of shop around and find things that way. But I always like to start with word of mouth or like recommendations from other people.
Great. Is that someone asking another question?
Hi, this is not actually a question. I'm Lucia from Redcase. I wanted to add that if you are looking for an agency, you can also look for it on Clutch or Good Firms, which are directories of agencies that can do development or maybe design. Just an idea.
Great. So I just sent in the chat box our kinship Slack channel if anyone wants to keep the conversation going. And I encourage everyone to join if you're not already part of that to get more information just about LEAP in general. And I want to say thank you again so much to Greer for such a great webinar. Definitely check out Dogdrop, check out their website and their Instagram. Some really cool things happening there. And we'll be posting this webinar on our YouTube channel if you want to come back and look at the slides again and get more information about web and product development. So thank you again. Check out our website for upcoming webinars. We'll be posting some more soon. One went up yesterday. And thanks again.
Thanks, Isabel.
Thanks, Greer.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.